Hey everyone, thanks for being with us. I'm really glad to be able to share with you today part of a conversation that I had earlier this week with David Aaron Johnson, who is the pastor of Tri-Worship Church. He also teaches at SPU and is in the middle of completing his certification to become a hospital chaplain. So he is a really busy guy, and I really appreciate the time that he took for this. We actually have been trying for some time to get this coordinated to make it happen, really since after Ahmaud Arbery was killed. And then we had a bunch of technological difficulties with it. But I'm really glad for the way the timing worked out, because I think the delay, we had no idea that things would escalate and intensify the way that they have. And so our conversation took on a different tone than I think it might have earlier. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that we're at the place that we're at in our study in the book of Nehemiah, because we are at chapter 5, where Nehemiah is himself addressing the oppression that is happening in Jerusalem among his own people. And so it's very timely and just feels really on point for our conversation this morning. Nehemiah chapter 5 verse 1 says this. Nehemiah writes, "Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers." You go, what is that about? In the verses that follow, he explains the reasoning for that, and we'll read a little bit of that in our conversation. But to summarize it, essentially what was going on is these people had come back from Babylon, many out of slavery, and then they get to Jerusalem thinking this is going to be a great new place for them, finding themselves being taken again into slavery by their own people. They are there to work on the wall, and they are finding that they don't have any resources. So the people who have privilege and power and wealth are taking advantage of them and are subjecting them, making them sell their own kids into slavery. And so it's this awful, awful situation. But what I love is the part where we get Nehemiah's reaction and response to it. It says this, a few verses later, "When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials." In these few verses, I see Nehemiah giving us a template for how we can respond when we're confronted with oppression. Very simply, at the beginning, it says that he heard their outcry. He heard it. He listened to it. He paid attention to it. He let the words of what was going on move deep into his heart. And once it was there, these three responses came out of it. Because first, he got really angry. He emotionally connected with the plight of his people. That word there for how angry he was means like burning hot. It was intense. And here, we've been saying all along that Nehemiah reflects for us a picture of Christ. And I think here in his reaction, we see Jesus, because Jesus was always on the side of the oppressed and the suffering. And Nehemiah gives us a picture of the very heart of God in being angry over this situation. But it moves from that into him saying that he pondered them in his mind. He pondered these outcries in his mind, meaning he mentally engaged with the situation. He thought about it. He wrestled with it. What needed to happen and how could he address it? And he really let this become more than just a feeling, to something that he was developing a thoughtful response to. And then that moved into the third response, which was actively repairing the damage that had been done. Because he went and he confronted the people who were doing the oppressing and called them on it. Well, we are living in the midst of one of the greatest outcries of our time. The protests and everything that is happening right now have been called the largest civil rights protest in history. It's unprecedented. And you cannot escape it. You cannot get away from being exposed to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're hearing it and we're listening to it. And as we come into this morning, this is the question for us: is are we listening to the outcry? Are we really hearing it and letting the words sink in and go deep? And are we seeing those three responses for ourselves? One, are we emotionally connecting with the plight of the people. And by that, I'm not talking about getting angry about the looting. Why don't we instead get angry about a situation where we have people who have not been heard to the point where looting becomes their only expression that gets attention? That let's keep our anger on the racism that is at the root of this, and not leave it here at this other level, but really drill down so that we are placing ourselves on the side of the oppressed and in the shoes of the people who are feeling this pain. And secondly, then, are we mentally engaging with it? Are we getting out of just feeling a bunch of feelings to a point where we're thinking about how to grapple with it, how to interact with this? And I want to say that we have placed some resources on our website, and you can go to our homepage and click on a link there, and it will take you to 3 books, and they are, you can find a list of books anywhere, but these 3 are excellent resources for a starting point. And if you're not a reader, we've also attached 3 videos that go along with each book, and so you could choose that instead. But I would encourage you, in fact, I would challenge you to pick one of those this week and either read or watch it. Listen to some new voices that will ask different questions than you've been asking, and that will expand your understanding in new ways on these topics and the issues that are at stake. And then out of that, are we actively repairing damage that's been done? What can we do? As we've been saying in Nehemiah, there is something right outside our front door. That's our piece to deal with. That whatever is right in front of us is ours to engage with. And that may be looking at some attitudes and beliefs in your own heart that you need to let go of and move past. It may mean conversations that you need to have with people that you know and interact with on a regular basis. There's a whole host of things that may be ours to do and to own. But where can we actively begin to undo some of the damage? And even this morning, as we go into this conversation, to come at it with open ears to really listen and hear what's being said. And part of that, I think, is to cultivate a sense of our own brokenness and to really come at it with an attitude of humility, because these things are deep and they raise all kinds of layers of issues for each one of us, and none of us has a complete handle on what needs to happen. And so to come at this with a degree of recognition that we really need God's mercy on every level about this. And part of that, I think, that the church has practiced for centuries is this idea of lament and confession, that we acknowledge the fact that we are part of a people with big sins and a big need for God that is beyond us, and so we cry out to Him. Emmanuel Katongole and Chris Rice wrote this in their book about lament. They said, "Lament is a cry directed to God. It is the cry of those who see the truth of the world's deep wounds and the cost of seeking peace. It is the prayer of those who are deeply disturbed by the way things are. The journey of reconciliation is grounded in the practice of lament." The journey of reconciliation is grounded in the practice of lament. And to that end, what I would like to do is lead us in a time of corporate lament, quarantine style. This is a lament that we used in our prayer time last Sunday, but I wanted to share it with the larger group here. And what I'm going to do is read a series of statements of confession, each one that is followed up by the phrase, "O Lord, hear and forgive." And what I want to invite each of you to do, wherever you're watching this, is to, as we get to that phrase, to say it out loud with the recording, "O Lord, hear and forgive." And I realize that's probably going to feel awkward. It's going to feel unnatural. But who cares? We can be uncomfortable together, because sometimes being uncomfortable makes way for something new. And there is a value to externalizing a thought verbally to enable us to internalize the idea more fully. And so we'll go through this lament and go directly from there into the conversation with David Aaron, and then we'll come back for some concluding thoughts and sharing the Lord's Supper together.
O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with all who love him and obey his commands, we have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and have rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and laws. We have not listened.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
Lord, you are righteous, but this day we are covered with shame. Our nation is still plagued by systemic injustice, and we've turned a blind eye.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
We have not taken up the cause of the oppressed. We have withheld compassion. We have been suspicious of the other and not welcomed the stranger. And in doing so, we have not welcomed you.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
For the times we have been too fearful to be obedient.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
For our preoccupation with our own concerns and considering our own needs ahead of others.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
For our pride in thinking we are not part of the problem, and therefore it is not our problem.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
For not translating what we say we believe into how we live.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
For the times we have wanted to hurt or hate those who have caused us pain.
O Lord, hear and forgive.
Now, O God, who led your people out of Egypt by your mighty hand, lead us as your people into a new place. For the sake of your name, do not delay. Deliver us from evil. Heal us. Embolden us, we pray. Amen.
I'm here today with David Aaron Johnson, who's the pastor of Tri Worship, our good friends over there. And thanks so much. This feels like a victory today because we've tried this now 3 times, and it's
victory.
Yes, it's so good to see you. And I just want to say off the bat, I just appreciate your friendship so much. It's been so great to be able to dialogue over the years really now with you about the topic of reconciliation, and to have you be so gracious with my ignorance about it, and to just hold the stupid things I say sometimes and be my friend through it. And so I'm super thankful for you, and it was great to be able to spend some actual time next to you this weekend, and just stand with you and be in that. So thank you.
Well, you're so welcome, and I so appreciate your friendship and your relationship, even on the recent journeys that I've been on in terms of the church planting and the reconciling journey. You have been really a wonderful dialogue partner, so I really appreciate you. And it also was wonderful standing with you for a moment yesterday.
Yes.
That was a good feeling just for that.
It was a good moment, and really felt like there was a lot of support that was shown yesterday by both the people that turned out and the people going by. I thought,
it really speaks to the Imago Dei of what we were created to be. People want the right thing. It was a representation of people want to see. There's a lot of people who are drawn to the ideal of love, peace, justice, and that type of harmony. And that was very evident yesterday. It was just a beautiful thing. I'm excited to have heard that the prayers that you guys are doing in your church and the opportunities there is to share confessions and feelings and emotions around the ideal of racial righteousness and being able to do that, CPE ourselves, looking at our internal self.
Yes.
Clinical pastoral education, which I'm going through a 4-unit process to become a chaplain. So we call it CPE when we start looking at our internal selves and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you have such a good demeanor for being a good presence with people in pain.
Which, that's a reconciling skill.
Yep.
Even as we look at the protests this weekend and the pieces and the protests in Seattle, I'm actually going to do a spiritual assessment of the protests in Seattle. And it was absolutely a being with people in pain, and being empathetic with people in pain and being able to hear that pain.
Yep.
And then the next piece will be kind of see how people are reacting to the pain, adapting to the pain. And this is what chaplaincy does,
Yeah.
Chaplaincy is hearing people's hearts around their pain.
Yes. What do you feel like you would like to see from the white church at this moment in time and the story of all that's happening?
Man, do we still say the white church now?
I don't know. I mean,
For the lack of a better way of saying it, the white
yeah.
church. For the lack of a better term, we're talking about the dominant culture white.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think.
Do we have an example of, again, my stumbling with how
Well, no, I mean, this is some of this stuff I'm working out. I'm looking forward to developing, some responses and some support to this conversation. Because what I do, I believe the white church should be asking the questions. They should be continuing to educate themselves, coming aware, dealing with the ideal of white frigidity, white supremacy, white privilege, and all that kind of stuff. Kind of exploring these pieces as well, and being willing to come into the uncomfortable, conversations. This is the new place for me with white people.
Right.
Is because I think for me, I've been one who may have, leaned to comfort too much. When I have these conversations, and I'm the peace bearer,
Sure.
and sometimes I made things too comfortable. And I think that might be the challenge now to white people in general, and in the white church. Really, if it's too uncomfortable, there's not a place of growth. If it's too uncomfortable, if it's like too easy, this is too easy, then we're not going to get a chance to grow. And I think that's where I would call, the white church to be, or, if you're not ready for that place, to get yourself to that place. But I think presence and the ability to be present is so important to the cause. That's another CPE piece, being present, being there with, in the pain. That's a huge piece. That's a huge part of it. I think that's a valuable piece. And somehow, being with it, and then the empathy, being able to feel it, and connect to the pain, doing that work.
Yeah.
is so needed and so critical.
Yeah.
And the burden of that, the burden.
Mm-hmm.
I preached from the Numbers text. I was so tired, I really didn't start on my sermon till Sunday morning. Don't tell nobody that. But since everybody's going to hear this, But Numbers, Moses and the children of Israel about to go into the promised land. The people are groaning. It's from the lectionary. And then Moses started complaining, and a lot of people complaining, even in our culture now, about what's happening, this cycle of racism and all this kind of stuff. So God imported the spirit on 70 elders, 70 men. And it was like when they received the spirit of God upon them, they received the burden. So Moses didn't have to carry the burden by himself, and I see reconciliation. It was a reconciliation. I think Pentecost is a reconciliation thing, period. Yeah. But the piece that I pulled out of that was the burden, carrying the burden, feeling the burden, empathizing with the burden.
I mentioned to you that we're going through the book of Nehemiah right now. And I wanted to read a little chunk from it where we're at right now and just get your impressions on it, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I think it's really relevant to some of the conversations we had yesterday even. So, the people of Israel have all been rebuilding this wall in Jerusalem. And Nehemiah says this, he says, sorry, I got to get my glasses here because this is too hard for me to read here. So we'll try this again.
I understand.
All right. So I'm just going to read you this.
That's good on you, man.
Oh, thanks.
That's good.
I feel like Mr. Peabody the dog.
They look good.
But
good.
So Nehemiah 5 says, now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. And although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are exacting usury from your own countrymen. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you're selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us. They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. That felt to me like some of the systemic problems that we were talking about happening in America right now. I don't know if any part of that struck you, stood out to you, but it felt like sort of similar scenario there.
Sound like a cycle, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Right.
Yeah. I speak it from African American male piece because it's us who are getting shot.
Right.
And I think even for me being a part of the protests, especially when in Seattle, you just feel you feel the vulnerability.
Sure.
Different. This is not just, all fun and peaceful, gonna have a good time. I mean, people really, you can feel the component of death, and you feeling that this really could be you, could have been you, had opportunities for it to be you. And then you see this cycle, this over and over type of thing. And what has some of these pieces done besides kind of help our emotional stuff get better with it, but systemically, you got to go deeper. That's where, you had the conversations about policies, legislation. We got to take it there.
Right.
And we we have to draw disciples to the cause of reconciliation, which I think activities like protests and pieces that we did yesterday could be a way to that. Do you think systemic affects the church?
Oh, I'm sure it does. I was looking up this quote here that I wanted to, because I think this speaks to it. It's by this is from someone named Christine Jeske, and this was in Christianity Today. She's talking about growing up in the church, and I think this is a pretty common experience for white Christians. And she said, "Well, I heard messages confirming that racism is wrong. There were also plenty denying that race really mattered." So then when I hear a discussion about racism, I can immediately go, well, that's not me. So I don't have to go any further. I don't drill it down further to go, well, it's bigger than just whether or not well, and first of all, that's probably not, I mean, there probably are deep biases that I have that I'm not even aware of. So there probably is racism in my own heart that I'm not acknowledging. But on top of it, there is systemic bias that if I'm already checking out saying, no, I can't be racist, then I can't look at the stuff that's really not so much personal as what I benefited from is.
I think that's awareness of white people who are at the level to go deeper, have to say, man, we need to step up our game quick. We need to we can build whatever Nehemiah says, the houses that I need to build my house on awareness. I need to take it up, you know? So I can be one who can educate and not, and be responsible for my own stuff, I think that's the place. That's hard for me to say to white really people. Good. But if we can build disciples and take it up a level, the white church take it up a level, I think that's where that gotta go. I mean, preaching on racism, praying on it, taking action, move beyond white guilt and all that kind of stuff. Oh, aren't we tired of that?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to just deal with that and move on. Okay, forgive ourselves and whatever we need to do. And so get to some of the deeper places so that maybe white people can get to the place of educating their own people in a very, I think that's a part of a way,
Yeah.
I heard someone, I saw one, I posted it, somebody's post, they said, man, I'm tired of carrying the same sign. I've been carrying the same sign for 60 years. I'm tired of putting up the same sign, stop killing us, stop justice, I think the spiritual warfare piece of this is also a next level step. But in my opinion, that's a step that I haven't seen engage a whole lot.
What in your relationship with God gives you hope in the face of that jadedness of seeing, holding the same sign for 60 years?
Well, I think God's ability to reconcile broken pieces of myself to Him and His ability to fix me, and experiencing the depth of that, the depth of the brokenness and the pain, to knowing that God can do it, even in a systemic place. Seeing people transform. I've seen people transform, I've seen people transform generation, like Gen Zs and like in my class, that gives me hope. You see this fresh type of, you see this inclusiveness, this resistance to exclusion. That gives me hope. It gives me hope. That gives me a lot of hope.
Is there one message either for New Day or in general, like thinking about your talk that you're going to give to the other chaplains? Is there, if you had your own soundbite, like what you would want to communicate to white Christians about where we're at today in reconciliation and their own participation, what would you most want to communicate?
Go beyond your limits. Go beyond your borders. Whatever that is, push beyond it. Create ministries to take you beyond it. Engage education to take you beyond your borders, your limits.
Thanks so much for doing this and taking the time. It feels so significant, and I'm really, like I said, just so grateful for your friendship, and you've been a good friend. You've been a good friend to New Day in general, and people at New Day love you and try worship and are always grateful when we make some sort of connection. And
we love New Day Church too. My favorite white church. I hate to have to say that, but because I love New Day, because the heart is good. You know what I mean? It's a good heart. I love New Day Church because I love you as a pastor, friend, as a friend, and I love the opportunity that we have here. It's just a good opportunity. So much to glean from and to value, and I appreciate New Day's journey and where New Day is at into this place. That even that we can have this conversation, and that you're doing the work you're doing and where you're at. So yeah, I absolutely love me some New Day Church.
Well, I sure appreciate you, and it's great. And let's talk again soon, because there's a lot. We're barely tapping the surface here.
I know there's so much to dig into.
That's good.
Well, let's dig into what we have, and let's come back and share what we know.
That sounds excellent. So, all right.
All right, my friend.
Take care, buddy. Thank you so much for listening in on that. I just love and appreciate his heart for reconciliation so much. As we're wrapping things up, I want to go back to Nehemiah 5 for a moment, because I think it has something else to say about listening. Nehemiah, when he went to confront the people about the oppression that was happening, they listened to him. They heard what he had to say, and they took it to heart. And they agreed with him that what they were doing was wrong. And in verse 12, their response was, "We will do as you say." We will do as you say. And not only that, but they did everything he asked of them. They gave back the land. They gave back their children and the money, and they established systemic reform. And it's such a hopeful picture, because there is actually change that happens here. It didn't get just stuck in the acknowledgement that something was broken. It moved it forward and brought real change. And I think this is one more place where we can we can see the picture that we've been saying of Christ being in Nehemiah's spot and us being in the spot of the people. Because just like it was Nehemiah who brought about the change, it's Christ who enables us to be able to change. Because Christ is not only the one who confronts, he's the one who gives us the power of response. He's the one that enables us to say we can do as he says. I was thinking about where David Aaron talked about white guilt and how we need to move past that. I heard an interview this week that our son Isaac did with Christian Dawson, who is the campus pastor for Northwest University. And Christian was talking about white guilt. And he said it's time to let go of guilt and take hold of responsibility. To let go of guilt and take hold of responsibility. And we can do both of those things because of Christ. It is Christ who takes care of our guilt. It is Christ who, on the cross, dealt with that. And we can be assured of our forgiveness there. And it's also Christ who gives us his Spirit, who is so about all the ministry of reconciliation that we have that empowerment and that internal ability now, if we have Christ, that is going to be something that he calls us to be engaged in and that we can actually say yes to, and we can do that. And that's really what the Lord's Supper says to us as we come to that we are acknowledging Christ's power to not only deal with our guilt, but to change our lives moving forward. We are going to take part in communion. So if you need to get something to use for the elements this morning, I'd encourage you to do that right now. But I want to read the passage that I read each time we take communion out of 1 Corinthians. Paul writes, and he says, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes.'" Each time we are taking this, we are declaring something to the world and to ourselves. We are reminding ourselves of who Christ is and what he came for. The very core of his message is contained in this little meal that we share together, because it reminds us, it draws us back to what he was all about. You know, I think about when Jesus stood up in the synagogue and he read from the scroll in Isaiah where it said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed." And it is that reminder that Christ came to address oppression on every level. The same sin that is behind racism is the same sin that makes my heart a complicated place to address racism. There is so much that sin affects that binds us and restricts us and presses down on us. And that's what the cross is for. That freedom, that release, and that lifting of the burden. And so as we come to take communion together this morning, I'd encourage you to pause for a moment, to pray and thank Christ for this fact that he not only has taken our guilt, but he's given us the power to be able to answer him and say, "We will do as you say." We can live in this new way that you've put out before us because of the cross. Thanks again so much for being with us. Before you go, one quick announcement for next Sunday, June 14th at noon in the Journey Church parking lot on 320th. We are hosting a socially distant parade for our graduating seniors, and we would love as many of you as possible to show up to help us celebrate them. They kind of got robbed of graduation this year, so we would love to just honor them really well. We'll space out the cars, and then they will drive through, and we'll yell and cheer and hoop and holler and make a big to-do about it. So please be part of that, and watch. There'll probably be some more information about that coming in your email this week. But as you go, I want to send you with one verse from Isaiah chapter 1. It's verse 17. And it says this. It says, learn to do right, seek justice, encourage the oppressed. Learn to do right, seek justice, encourage the oppressed. My prayer is that that will not just be words on a page for us, but that it will be the transformative Word of God that shapes how we see ourselves and our purposes, and that draws us into His work in the world. Amen.